Hello everyone and welcome to sil201 Intermediate Silhouette Effects with me, Ben Brownlee. So in class 1 we're going to be looking at establishing a sort of shared terminology so that when I start throwing out different terms we're all in agreement about what those particular terms mean. I do find that some people have different names for particular things that I use, so it's going to be useful just to spend a few moments just going over those so that we're both in agreement with what those actually mean. Now, throughout the course, we are going to be looking at different approaches to handling particular shots and particular problems within those shots. Now, each shot is going to be presenting us a particular challenge, and we are going to have to overcome these difficulties using different methods. But for now, I'm going to be looking at my overall strategy for handling any shot, and we'll be looking at particulars as the course goes on. What we are going to be looking at in detail is the trackers found within Silhouette Effects, because a good tracker is going to save you hours of time and a bad tracker is probably going to cost you the same amount of time as well. So we're going to be looking at the what, when and why of trackers. So what we can use them for, when we should be using them, and why would we even need them in the first place? And sometimes do we even need them? Are they going to be saving us time or costing us time? Now, when it comes to terminology, probably the biggest one is masks versus mats. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that big a distinction or that big a problem, because after all, both of these are ways of creating an alpha channel. Now, masks are the shapes that we're going to be creating ourselves. So they're the ones that we're going to be drawing using our roto splines and our roto toolset. Mats, on the other hand, are generated from the footage itself, usually as a process of either keying or channel combinations, or in the case of Silhouette Effects, by using something like the power mat, to actually use some property of the footage itself to build up that alpha channel without us going in and having to draw it up ourselves. Now obviously the creation of mats is going to be a lot less time consuming than the creation of masks. Now depending on the footage, it can be tricky or even impossible to get the results we want just from a mat, which is why we've got the masking tools in front of us. There will be certain tasks where we're asked not to deliver an alpha channel, so not to deliver this sort of black and white alpha out, which we can create easily with mats and masks, but they want the shapes out instead, and only the shapes, and those shapes are only created using the masks. So when it comes to shapes, what I'm talking about here is going to be a closed, self-contained spline. Now, when I'm talking about splines, I'm talking about any line that I'm creating with any of the roto spline tools. Now, it can be open, so we're just dealing with a line floating around, which is obviously going to be very useful when we're dealing with hair and wires, which we're going to be looking at in future classes, or it can be closed, creating our shape. Now, when I talk about the edge, I'm talking about the outline of the overall object that we are creating. And this is going to be the most important thing that we're going to be looking at, because as I said, complex objects are going to be made up of multiple shapes, so long as the edges of that overall shape is correct, and that's all going to be good, and there's lots of ways to get to that. Obviously not all edges are created equally, which is why we're going to be looking at certain techniques for making that a bit more simple. Now when it comes to typical rotoscoping techniques, there's generally a couple that are most popular. There's the interval keyframing technique, which is where you come in and you roto every X number of frames. So for example, you take every 24 frames, so you go frame 1, frame 25, frame 49, and so on and so forth until you reach the end. Then you go back, you check over your footage. If it's good, everyone's happy. If it's not, you come in and you split those keyframes in two. So you start rotoing every 12 frames, then every 6 frames, then every 3 frames. Now, I'm not a huge proponent of this technique in most circumstances. I personally think that it causes a lot of extra work and a lot of extra keyframes on footage that might not necessarily need it. But as we'll see in later classes, it is going to be a good technique in particular circumstances when the footage demands it. Now, the technique that I tend to use most is the motion-based keyframing technique. So I'll go through the footage and try and find the natural motion within it and base all of my keyframing off of that natural motion. And we'll be seeing lots of examples of that in the coming weeks. So when I first approach a shot, I always traffic light. So stop and read the brief. Now this is probably going to be one of the biggest time savers you can possibly get. If you're doing any sort of rotor work, you have enough on your plate without giving yourself extra work to go through. So if you read the brief and it says, you have to pay particular attention to one certain object, or, or an effect is going on one particular area of the screen, so that, really that area is the only thing that you have to worry about, then don't give yourself extra work. There's, there's no prizes being given out for doing a 100% roto on a shot where you only need to take out just a small little bit. And the next thing is to watch the shot and just watch it on loop, watch it ping-ponging back and forth, and really get to know the ins and outs of it. It's worth spending those extra 5 minutes at the beginning of a job, just watching a shot back and forth, until you know it so completely that you can, shut your eyes and actually see what's going on. Because that's really going to help you for the next bit of the traffic light. And that's all about preparing to go. And it's at this stage where you'll start to make up your little mental checklist of what you need to do, what the most suitable tools are for a particular job, where the problem areas are going to be, and how you can start to get around those bits. And the final stage is obviously going for it. So putting that mental checklist into action and then getting started on the shot. So that's what we're going to be doing right now. Okay, so let's now look at our first shot. Now I've got the footage loaded in here, so let's just come up to a new session and we will call this tracking 001. Let's just put our frames per second at 25. Keep everything else at standard, and we'll just use the roto node for the time being. Now we're looking at the traffic lights. First thing we do is stop, look at the brief and look at the footage. So the overall idea for this particular shot here is we need to come in and create a shape around just this edge over here once it's come down to the beaker down here, and we'll also need to come in and take out this pole over here on the left hand side, but again only when the hand starts to intersect it. So let's play this back again and just see what the challenges are going to be. Now I'm going to turn this from loop to swing. I actually prefer to watch this in swing rather than loop. So whereas loop will sort of just start again from frame 1 and move through to the end, swing will just sort of play us back and forth in a sort of ping pong motion. I find this really good to check out for inconsistencies in motion, especially towards the end of the shot. Now the issues we've got facing us here is we do have a moving camera. We also have the tool itself, which is moving, but the movement of the tool itself seems pretty straightforward. It's mainly the camera movement that's going to be causing us issues, because so what's going to happen is if we start to just roto out this tool straight away, what we're going to be doing is actually fighting two different types of movement. We're going to be fighting the movement of the camera, which is going in one direction, which is actually just moving down and then bouncing up and down a little bit as it finds the girl's face here. And we're also going to be fighting against the movement of the object itself. So just starting the roto from here and then working our way through is probably going to cause us more work than we might otherwise need to do. So in this sort of case, the first thing I try to do is find a suitable place for tracking. Can we track this object here? Actually, possibly we might be able to. Or can we track this object over here? So this object over here is probably less trackable than this one because there really is no good defining details in there. So the best thing for me to do is try and find a way of just stabilizing up the shot before we go any further. And that's going to be using a track. Let's come in and create our first layer here. So let's call this one post. This one post left. And the reason we're creating a layer here is because we have to apply tracking data to layer objects. We can't apply them to shapes. We have to apply them to layers. So now in the track tool, I've got a choice of two different types of tracker. We've got our point tracker and our planar tracker. We'll come back to the planar tracker. We'll just look at the point tracker for now. What I'm looking for here in an object to track is something that shares the same Z depth, so the same distance away from the camera, relatively speaking, as the objects that we're trying to roto, and an object that's also static within the frame. So the motion that we get from here is going to be shared across the different elements. Now there's a couple of different places we could be tracking. We could be looking at this bit of equipment over here. We do have some detail over here, and that's probably in the same relative Z depth as this pole over here. But because it's closer to the camera, it's probably not going to be as useful to get out our main tool here. So if we're having to do a lot of intricate work on this tool here, we might find ourselves actually fighting the track and sort of having to compensate for a not quite accurate track going on there. So because of that, I'm going to come in and look at my ashtray here. So if I hold down the Alt key, I can come in and create a tracking point wherever I want to. I can also just delete that one. I can also create it just by clicking there, and that will just bring one straight into the middle of the footage. So the point tracker in Silhouette Effects works in exactly the same way as point trackers everywhere. You have your main point in the middle, which is going to be the point data that we're actually going to be taking out to put onto our layer. We have our feature box, which is the inner box here. That's the match box that we're looking for. So this is going to be the shape that we're looking for. Then we have our search area, which is the dotted box on the outside. And we can adjust these either in the interface in the viewer or over here if we want to in the object controls. So we'll just pull that in a little bit. There we go. Cool. Now what's nice about this particular point tracker is we have actually quite a good amount of feedback about what is going to be tracked at any given time. In the point tracker over here, we have this little box which is showing us what's being tracked at the moment, so what's actually inside our match box. And we take a look that now there's not a huge amount of contrast going on in there. So we can come in and we can start to pre-process our footage up. So if we want to get out a little bit of the noise, we can take the blur out, we can sharpen up some of the edges again with sharpen, bump the contrast up. So now we can start to see that that's a much better feature than we had previously, much more distinguishable. And at the end, we also have another little bit of denoise to get rid of some of the last bit there. We also have a remove flicker. So if there is some small lighting changes going on within your shot between frames, we can use the remove flicker here, sort of even everything out and get a better track out of it. What's quite cool is that we can turn the preview on and we can see exactly what our pre-processing is doing to the image. So we can now pick out, see whether there's actually going to be a better place to look or a better feature to track than the little spot on the ashtray there. Coming back over to our channel, we can choose between the red, green and blue, or luminance, or the color RGB. This doesn't seem to update our viewer, so we're still sort of reliant on our little point tracker preview window here for that. And when we're ready, we can start to just let's just track that through to begin with, see how good a track we're getting. Now what we're looking for is I'm just going to scrub through here with Z and X. What we're really looking for here is to make sure that that stays as steady as it possibly can get. And we can see here it's actually not hugely steady, sort of bouncing around a little bit. If it's not good enough, we can start to play around with the behavior and tolerance to try and get a better result. The behavior is determining how it's looking for that particular feature here. At the moment it's looking and changing that feature every frame, so that's why we're probably not getting the best result. because the feature's not really changing every frame. It's staying very static. So all that's doing is introducing the noise between the frames, which is why we're bouncing around a little bit. And the tolerance is how accurate it has to be before it sort of declares it's found a match and then moves on. So the tolerance of 100, it's going to be very, very picky about what's going on. With a low tolerance, it's not going to be that picky. So that's looking a lot better, actually. Now we can just track that backwards. And it goes off, of course, because we don't need all of this data. We actually only really are interested from around about, actually that's great, so from around about just where it disappears off. So frame 44, 45? 45. It's probably the last good frame that we've got there. So just so we don't confuse anything, what I'm going to do is just come back in to my timeline here and just delete all those other ones there. So what I can do for the last few frames here is actually really easily offset this little shape just by clicking and moving it to a point over here, and you'll notice that the position feature stays exactly where it is, but now I've got my match changed over here, and my match offset is now changed up there as well. So now I can track that back another couple of frames, and that's disappeared out again. So we only actually really got another couple of frames. That one's not good. So come back into the timeline again, just delete that one out. And I think that's going to be good enough for now. Let's turn my preview back off. We are still bouncing a little bit here. So something we can do is come in and just hit smooth, and this will actually, let's zoom in a little bit. I to zoom in. Take a look at the motion path here. What I can start to do is I add smooth in there. You can start to see that starting to smooth out quite a lot. This is destructive, so I would be very light on this, if at all possible. And that's looking kind of cool. So we're getting some good movement there. So now I'm happy with that. Hit F again to move to zoom back to fill the screen, and I can now select my tracker and the layer that I want to apply that to. Hit apply, and I now have. Play that through as you go back to transform. And let's just concentrate on the area that we want. It's around about frame 36. All the way to the end. So you can see I now have my tracker in place. So we hit stabilize up there. I've now taken out all of that camera movement, except for the bit at the very end. Where there's still a little bit of work to do. But that's really cool, because now I can come in and draw my shape. Let's just do a really quick square. There we go, just do a really quick square. We'll be looking at the edge softness in a little bit, but for now I'm just going to take it right to the very hard edge. And that should be absolutely fine. Turn my stabilize off. Cool, so I don't have to add any keyframes on that except for the ones where we are going from here, which is frame 42. Add a keyframe there. Hit T to bring in the transform. Pop that down. Try and do point-to-point matching if at all possible. So look where we're going here. So look at the top right-hand corner. Just on the little bit of the glint there. Doesn't matter too much in here, but this is going to be a very important concept for later on. Cool. And the nice thing about this tracker is I can actually start to reuse this. So let's call this camera stabilize tracker. Bring it down to the bottom so it doesn't annoy anyone. Because let's actually look at this one here now, this little tool here. So add another layer up here, and I will call this tool. Let's take a quick look at that. And we only really need it from right about there. So that's frame 69. We can always take our work area in and out at any point. What was it before? 36. And it doesn't destroy any of the keyframes or anything, of course. So take that back to frame 69. There we go. So this is now the area that we're interested in. Let's take a look at this. See if we can actually start to track our way out of this. So get an object track going on here. And let's turn off the other layers just so that we're not focused on them. I'm going to hold down the Alt key and let's come in and try and track the end of this here. Don't need the contrast to be quite as extreme. So if we're wanting to help out a little bit more than this, because I mean, to be honest, if I was actually wanting to rotate this out properly, I wouldn't be looking at actually object tracking this just with a single point. There'd be no sort of value really in doing that, because it's going to be rotating all over the place, and the movement itself is sort of straightforward enough that there's not a huge time saving to be offered there. So I'd probably just reuse that camera stabilize and just sort of work my way through that. But if possible, if we can get a 2-point track coming out of here, it might be worthwhile. So what I'm looking for here is just to add another tracker point in to get the rotation and possibly the scale of this particular tool. So what I'm looking for is something in the same plane, so in the same line, and probably this one here is going to be as good as we're going to get. Now if we're tracking 2 points at the same time, which we can do just by having them selected, we don't have a way of changing the pre-processing per tracker. So if you wanted to do that, you track one of the points through first, and then let's just set that to start frame. Yeah, you track one of the points through first, and then track the other one through after changing the pre-processing. So tracking that forwards, it doesn't look like we've got a particularly good track on the first point. The second one seems to be actually nice, acceptable. So let's see where we're going wrong with the first one. We're going wrong really quickly. So we can try and help it along by sort of refocusing that. If you're doing that, use the Z and X keys just to flip your way through. And again, you're wanting to see no difference going on there. And in this case, and I don't even think any of the color channels are going to offer me any particular advantage, because even the RGB here, this is blue, so we're not going to be getting any particular advantage going through there. So it might be a case of just trying to help it out through the tricky points. Till it can actually stick. Pushing that down a little bit, making my match size a little bit, or my search size I mean, a little bit smaller, because the movement itself now is going to be rather small. Playing that through, yeah. So it's a wee bit dodgy at the beginning. Try and smooth that out a little bit. Cool, and let's see how far that gets us. So when we're trying to take out a track for scale and rotation, we need to have both of the relevant trackers selected, come over to our tool as well, which is the layer, shape layer, hit apply now, and now we can apply scaling and rotation, or actually just rotation here. Let's try all of them, see how far we get with that. Let's bring our trackers in here. We'll call this tool point track. And this one tool edge track. Bring those back down to the bottom so they don't annoy anyone. And let's come back into our transform, have a look at our tool here. And if it's done a decent job, it should be following around. And we'll have a little look. And it's actually added our transform data to the matrix here. So we can still come in and we can still, scale, rotate, and change the position of our shape layer as and when we need to. So let's have a little look here. Let's come in. Going to come to my X-spline and just draw a quickie little spline there. And do another couple just for the other bits of the tool. Zoom in just a little bit just to get a better view of what's going on there. Here, I'll go to my reshape tool here because I can see that we've got one bit of the tool is going on here. We've also got another little odd shape coming in around the back. And we take a look at that. You can see that's moving independently. So it's a little pincer going on. So I'm going to have another little X-spline for that. Let's color code these up. We've got hundreds of, well actually not even hundreds, when we've got several shapes going on all at once, we can either be very good and name all of them up, or we can just come in and color code them and name just the relevant ones up. So at the moment, just in the reshape tool, just to get the overall shape working nicely. Cool, and let's hit A, turn our overlays off and see how far our tracking's got us. Stabilize that up just to see what's going on. And actually that's not bad. It's it's probably done. Not a bad little job for us. I can see here that I need to extend that out a little bit, because the initial shape itself wasn't quite right. So I'm going to come into my master frame here, turn my overlays back on, back into the reshape tool. Just holding down the Alt key there, just to shape up the X-splines a little bit better. Cool, and turn the multi-frame off. The multi-frames let me change the initial shape without adding an extra keyframe, because I don't really want to add another keyframe here. That's not perfect by any means. But at least with the stabilize on, we can see where it's not perfect. So let's add, come in here to all of them, add another keyframe here. Probably around about here I need to tighten this ship up as well. So now I've started to add keyframes. I don't want to start to keyframe up the initial points. I want to just change the shape here a little bit more. Probably the initial shape there is wrong now. You can see just rocking and rolling a little bit just to see where the problems lie. That's all in that one. Cool, and that started to get us a good step of the way there. Now we're going to look at some of the specific roto techniques in other classes. What I want to have a look at now is the other tracking tool that we didn't look at, which is the planar tracker. And for this I'm going to come into another bit of footage. So come in and we will call this tracking 002, 25 frames a second. Let's take a quick look at this. So in terms of tracking, for a long time the point tracker was the only game in town, but over the last few years planar tracking technologies really started to change all of that up, and we're seeing tracking tools that can track a whole load of different shapes and shots with a lot more ease than just using the point tracker. Let's come in, and what we're going to do here is we're going to look at our little tentacle and create a little tentacle shape here as well. Now what I'm looking to do here is to create a shape that the planar tracker can start to work with. So what I want to do is really sort of just draw a shape that describes this plane that is going on the side of the tentacle here, because it's this side of the tentacle that I want to track. I don't just want to track a single point on here, I want to track this side. So now if I come over to the tracking tool again and come down to my planar tracker, you can see that it started to automatically put in a series of points in here. Now there's really not actually all that much to be done with the planar tracker in Silhouette. In 4.1 they redid the planar tracker again and sort of made it a lot more straightforward to use. So and let's turn the alpha channel off there for a moment, and let's come in and just take a look. So what's actually happened here is it's gone through and it's looked at our image here and it's decided that it can find, at the moment, 35 valid tracks to try and have a look at within our shape. So instead of us going in and manually tracking individual points, it's created a series of points that it's going to automatically track. And our choices really are about finding out which channel is going to be the best. Let's take a look at our preview here. It's starting to update that there. And the pre-processing is also in effect here as well. So if I change my blur, for example, you can see all of a sudden I've got a different number of tracks. If I take the blur all the way up, it's found 609 valid tracks. I severely doubt that number. I think that if we actually try to track this through, actually let's do that there, that we're getting a huge amount of noise coming in through the tracks here. We're not getting a particularly great result out of it. So you see our shape itself is sort of bouncing around a little bit there. So let's take our blur down significantly and reset our trackers. Now it's only found 29. Let's see if one of the channels is going to give us a bit of a better result. Probably actually the red channel's going quite well. Just another word of warning. If you have remove flicker turned on, you try and track this through, it's not going to work. So you need to turn remove flicker off for the planar tracker to be doing its stuff. So let's track that through. So you're still pulsating around a little bit. The planar tracker. The planar tracker in Silhouette can be a little bit finicky sometimes. So there's actually quite a lot of time where you might struggle to get a particularly good track straight away off a particular piece of footage, and it can end up sort of bouncing around a whole lot like this. So does it mean that this data here is completely unusable? Well, actually, no, it doesn't. Now, whilst we have no direct access to this tracking data here, once we've applied it, well, actually we don't even need to apply it with the tracking data. It's already automatically applied onto the matrix of our main shape. Once it's there, there is actually a little way of getting access to it and sort of trying to clear it up a little bit. So if I come over to my point tracker now, right click on my spline, what I can do is I can create corner trackers from the shape bound. So this is now going to give me 4 new tracking points, and you can see exactly where the problem areas lie. So you can see all of this stuff here is meant to be a nice smooth camera movement, and it's really not smooth at all. So what we can do, if you want to, is on an individual point by point basis, we can come in and try and fix this up. So we come into the timeline here, find where our dodgiest keyframes are, and sort of delete those up. Not ideal, and it could take a long time to do it. So of course what we've got here is also possibility to use the smooth option up here. This might make things a little bit better. It's still not particularly great at the moment. If we have a look here where it's tracking, it does seem to be a little bit of confusion still going on. But let's see what we can get out of it. Let's come in and just smooth up all of these. Smooth up this one down at the bottom. And let's create a brand new shape here. We will call this Tentacle 2. Let's copy and paste our spline back into tentacle 2 here and turn that one off. And change the colour on this. We'll change the colour to green. So we're going to have a green and a red. So in our tracker now, let's take our 4 corner point trackers that we got from the original shape and our active layer here, hit apply. Automatically corner pin tracking is being applied to our active layer here. It's come back into the transform now. Let's take a little look. See, that's a whole lot smoother. Let's compare it to our original tentacle. So our original tentacle was bouncing around all over the place. And the green one, whilst not 100% still, is actually in a much more manageable state. So you can see it is actually possible to get some quite good tracking data off of the planar tracker, even when the planar tracker itself is just skipping around all over the place. Now there's still some features in the tracking that we haven't had a chance to have a look at right now, but we will be coming back to it again. Things like being able to import, export out the tracking data, blend other tracking points together. We'll be doing this as the course goes on. I hope there's been a nice and interesting little introduction. I also look forward to seeing you in the forums and keep your questions coming over there. But thanks a lot for now.